She was left paralyzed on a wooden handcart. One cowboy couldn't bear to ride away. A young woman lay on a thin blanket near a wooden handcart, her eyes fixed on the pale sky above her. Just days ago, she had been walking beside her family, carrying what little they owned, believing that each step was taking her closer to a safer future. Now, she could not feel her legs at all. Her name did not matter as much as her story. She was someone's daughter, someone's sister, and once someone full of laughter and hope. The accident had happened quickly. One wrong step on loose ground, the cart tipping, her body striking the hard earth with a sound no one forgot. At first, she believed the pain would pass. Pain always did, but this time it stayed. When she tried to stand, her legs would not answer her. Fear crept into her chest like cold water. Her family gathered around her, worry written on every face. They tried lifting her, tried rubbing her legs, tried praying louder. Hours passed and nothing changed. The trail was unforgiving. Food was counted carefully. Water was already scarce. Winter clouds were beginning to appear in the distance. Every extra hour on the road meant danger for everyone. The unspoken truth slowly became clear to them all. That night, while she lay awake listening to the quiet sobs of her mother, she understood what they were thinking. She did not blame them, but the understanding hurt more than the injury. She wished for anger, because anger would have been easier than the deep sadness settling inside her heart. The next morning came too soon. Her father avoided her eyes. Her mother's hands shook as she adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. They spoke softly, using words that tried to sound kind but felt sharp all the same. They said they would leave her near the trail where someone else might pass. They said she would be closer to rest that way. They said many things, but none of them could hide the truth. She did not scream. She did not beg. Her voice was small when she said she understood. Inside, something broke quietly. She watched as they placed her carefully on the wooden handcart, the same cart she had pushed with aching arms only days before. They left her a little water, a piece of bread, and a worn coat. It was not much, but it was all they could spare. When the wagon train finally moved on, the sound of wheels faded slowly into the open land. Dust settled. Silence took its place. The young woman was alone. The sun climbed higher, pressing down on her face. She tried to move her legs again, hoping for a miracle. Nothing happened. Panic rose and her breathing became fast and shallow. She forced herself to slow down, remembering her mother's voice telling her to stay calm in times of fear. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for rescue, but for strength. Time passed strangely after that. Minutes felt like hours. She watched clouds drift across the sky, counting them to keep her mind busy. Her throat grew dry and she took small sips of water, knowing she had to make it last. The land around her felt endless, with no trees close enough to offer shade. Every sound made her heart jump, but nothing came. As the heat of the day softened into afternoon, memories filled her mind. She thought of her childhood home, of evenings filled with shared meals and stories. She remembered laughter, simple joys, and dreams she once carried so easily. Each memory felt like a thread pulling her backward, away from the lonely present. Fear came in waves. Sometimes it was sharp and strong, making her want to cry out. Other times it was quiet, like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. She wondered how long it would take before the cold came at night, and whether she would still be awake to feel it. She wondered if anyone would ever know what became of her. As the sun began to sink, the air grew cooler. Shadows stretched across the land and the silence deepened. She pulled the coat tighter around herself, her hands trembling from weakness and fear. Her body felt small against the wide world, and for the first time she allowed herself to cry. Tears slipped down her cheeks, soaking into the blanket beneath her head. She cried for her family, for herself, and for the life she feared she had lost. But even in her tears, a quiet part of her refused to give up completely. She told herself to stay awake, to keep watching the trail. People traveled these paths every day. Someone might come, someone might see her. As darkness approached, the stars began to appear one by one. She had always loved the night sky. Now it felt distant, almost cruel in its beauty. Her body ached and her head felt light. She took another small sip of water and whispered another prayer, her voice barely louder than the wind. The night was long. Sounds carried farther in the dark, and each one set her heart racing. She imagined footsteps that were not there. She imagined voices calling her name. Sleep came only in short, restless moments, filled with dreams of walking, running, and waking again to stillness. By morning, her strength was fading. The sun rose again, painting the land in soft light. She felt weaker than before, her thoughts moving slowly. Still, she forced herself to keep her eyes open. She knew that if help came, she needed to be seen. That was when she noticed something far down the trail, a small shape against the rising dust. At first, she thought it was another trick of her tired mind. But as the shape grew clearer, her heart began to beat faster. It was a rider, a lone figure moving steadily across the land. Hope, fragile and trembling, stirred inside her. She wanted to call out, but her voice was weak. She gathered all her remaining strength and lifted one hand, letting it fall back onto the blanket. She whispered, not knowing if anyone could hear but believing it was worth trying. The rider had not yet turned his head. The distance between them was still great. The young woman lay still, her eyes fixed on that moving figure, afraid to blink. Everything she had left rested in that moment. The trail, once a place of loss and silence, now held a single thread of possibility. And though she did not know it yet, the choice that Ryder would soon make would change both of their lives forever. The rider moved slowly along the trail, his horse stepping carefully over the uneven ground. He had been riding since early morning, keeping a steady pace, his eyes trained on the path ahead. Life on the frontier had taught him to stay alert, but also to mind his own business. Stopping too often could mean danger, delay, or trouble he could not afford. Yet something felt wrong. He pulled gently on the reins and slowed the horse. In the distance, near the edge of the trail, he saw a shape that did not belong. A wooden handcart stood alone, tilted slightly as if it had been left in a hurry. There were no wagons nearby, no people moving around it, just silence. For a moment he told himself it was nothing. Abandoned carts were not uncommon. Families sometimes lightened their loads to survive. He turned his horse forward again. Then he noticed movement. It was small, barely there, but it was enough. A hand lifting, then falling back down. His chest tightened. He stopped fully this time. The rules of the trail whispered in his mind. Keep moving, don't risk what you can't fix, survive first. He had lived by those rules for years. Still, his hands would not move the reins. With a quiet breath, he turned his horse around and rode back toward the cart. As he came closer, the scene became clear. A young woman lay on the cart, her face pale, her eyes open but heavy with exhaustion. Her clothes were dusty, her hair loose and tangled. She looked at him as if she were afraid he might disappear if she blinked. He slid down from his horse quickly and stepped toward her, careful not to scare her. "Easy," he said softly, his voice low and calm. "You're not alone. But I'm glad I did." Years of riding and rough living had taught him enough to know the injury was serious. Moving her would not be easy. Staying with her would slow him down greatly. He stood and looked around. The land was open, with little shelter. Clouds gathered far away, hinting at weather that could turn harsh quickly. He thought of the supplies he carried, the distance to the nearest settlement, and the risks of trying to help. Then he looked back at her. She lay there quietly, watching his face, waiting. She did not beg. She did not cry. That made the choice harder, not easier. "I won't leave you," he said at last. Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded as if she had expected nothing else. Relief washed over her face, soft and quiet. He worked quickly. He moved her cart closer to a low rise of land that blocked some of the wind. Using branches and a spare cloth, he made a small shade. He gave her more water than a bit of food, helping her eat slowly. As the day wore on, he stayed close, keeping watch on the trail and the sky. He spoke to her when she seemed awake, asking her about where she came from, what she liked before the journey began. She told him simple things, how she enjoyed singing, how she missed baking bread with her mother, how she once dreamed of a small home with a garden. He told her little about himself, only that he had been riding alone for a long time, working where work could be found, never staying anywhere too long. That night the air grew cold. He built a small fire a safe distance away and sat beside her, feeding the flames and watching the dark. She slept in short stretches, waking often. Each time she seemed surprised he was still there. "I thought you might change your mind," she whispered once. He shook his head. "Some things don't sit right if you walk away." Carefully, slowly, he prepared to move her toward the settlement he knew lay days away. Every step was hard. The ground was rough and the cart was heavy. He pushed when he could, pulled when he had to. His muscles burned, but he did not complain. She watched him, guilt and gratitude mixing in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said more than once. "Don't be," he replied each time. "This isn't your fault." He wondered what would happen if he failed. But each time those thoughts came, he looked at her face and kept moving. As evening fell again, they had covered only a short distance. He made camp once more, cooking a simple meal. They ate together under the open sky, sharing the quiet. "You could have ridden on," she said softly. "No one would have known." "I would have known." The days that followed were harder than either of them expected. The land did not become kinder just because they were trying their best. The trail twisted through dry ground, shallow dips, and long open stretches where the sun showed no mercy. Each morning the cowboy woke before the light fully touched the sky. His body ached, his hands rough and sore, but he never complained. He checked on the young woman first always. She watched him quietly as he worked. He adjusted the blankets around her, made sure her water pouch was close, and asked how she felt. Some days she answered honestly. Other days she smiled and said she was fine, even when her face told a different story. She did not want to slow him more than she already had. Moving the handcart took time and strength. The wheels often stuck in the dirt and rocks made the ride painful for her no matter how careful he tried to be. When that happened, he stopped at once. He apologized each time, though she never blamed him. She learned to grip the edge of the cart and breathe through the discomfort, focusing on the sky above her. They spoke often now. Talking helped pass the long hours and pushed away dark thoughts. She told him more about her past, how she once believed the journey would lead to a fresh start, how she had imagined working hard and building something new. She admitted how frightened she had been when her family left her behind, and how close she had come to giving up hope. He listened closely, never rushing her words. When she paused, he waited. Sometimes he shared pieces of his own life. He spoke of places he had seen, of people he met and left behind. He did not talk much about pain, but it lived quietly behind his eyes. She sensed it without asking. There were moments when her spirit fell low. On one such afternoon, the sky darkened suddenly and wind swept across the plain. The weather turned cold and sharp. She began to shake, fear creeping back into her chest. She worried they would not find shelter in time. He worked fast, finding a small cluster of rocks and setting up what protection he could. He wrapped her tighter, blocking the wind with his own body when needed. The storm passed after a long while, leaving them both exhausted but safe. That night she whispered, "Why are you really doing this?" She watched the trail for changes, warned him of dips or stones she could see from her place on the cart. She reminded him to drink water, to rest when his steps slowed. In her stillness, she became his second set of eyes. Slowly, something inside her changed. Though her body remained weak, her mind grew stronger. She stopped measuring time in fear and began to notice small things: the sound of birds at dawn, the color of the land at sunset, the way he hummed softly while working. These details gave her comfort. One evening, as they rested under a sky full of stars, she confessed her greatest fear. "I'm afraid I'll never be useful again," she said. "That I'll always be a burden." But each time he looked back at her, saw her watching him with quiet trust, he found the will to take another step. One morning she woke to a sharp pain and a wave of weakness. Her breathing became uneven and her face lost color. Panic rose in him like fire. He stayed calm on the outside, giving her water, speaking softly, keeping her awake. He feared losing her, feared that he had come this far only to fail. She held on to his hand with what strength she had left. "Don't let me sleep," she whispered. "I won't," he promised. Hours passed slowly, but her strength returned bit by bit. When she finally rested peacefully, he sat beside her, his hands shaking with relief. From that day on, their bond deepened. Not in loud words or promises, but in shared struggle and quiet care. They depended on each other now in ways neither had expected. As they neared the edge of familiar land, signs of people began to appear: old tracks, distant smoke, broken fences. Hope stirred stronger than before. She noticed the change in his steps, lighter despite his weariness. "Do you think we're close?" she asked. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I do." The ground was more worn, with clear paths pressed into the dirt. Fences stood in uneven lines, and smoke rose gently from chimneys in the distance. The young woman noticed it first. Her heart began to beat faster, not from fear this time, but from something close to relief. He stopped the handcart and looked ahead. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he let out a slow breath he felt like he had been holding for days. "We made it," he said softly. Tears filled her eyes. She had imagined this moment many times, but now that it was real, it felt almost unreal. She was alive. She was here. As they moved closer, people began to notice them. A man repairing a fence paused and stared. A woman carrying water stopped mid-step. Soon a few hurried over, concern clear on their faces. They asked questions all at once, voices full of surprise and worry. He answered calmly, explaining her condition and how long they had been traveling. Without delay, the people moved into action. They brought a stretcher, warm blankets, and clean water. She was lifted carefully, her body shaking not from pain but from the sudden release of tension. As they carried her toward a small building used for care, she looked back at him. He stood there, dusty and worn, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Their eyes met. "Don't leave," she said quietly. "I'm right here," he replied. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of herbs and clean cloth. Gentle hands worked around her, offering comfort and care. For the first time since the accident, she felt safe enough to close her eyes fully. Before sleep took her, she reached out and felt his hand in hers. When she woke, light streamed through a nearby window. Her body still felt heavy, but the sharp fear was gone. A woman sat nearby, smiling kindly. She explained that the injury would take time to understand and that walking might not return. The words were hard, but they were spoken with honesty and care. Later, he came to see her. He had cleaned up, though his eyes still showed how tired he was. He stood awkwardly near the door, as if unsure of his place. "They say I might not walk again," she said, watching his face closely. He nodded slowly. "I know." There were moments of frustration, moments when tears came without warning, but each time someone was there. Often it was him. He stayed in the settlement longer than he planned. He helped where he could, repaired fences, moved supplies, earned his keep. Each evening he visited her. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun lower through the window. One evening she asked the question that had been growing in her heart. "Why did you stay?" she asked, "even after we arrived?" She helped with sorting, teaching children to read, and offering comfort to others who were struggling. Slowly, she realized that her worth had never depended on her legs. One afternoon, as she watched children play outside, she smiled. "I still have a life," she said. He smiled back. "You always did." He came to say goodbye, his expression serious. "I'll ride out tomorrow," he said, her chest tightened. "I understand." That was the easiest choice I ever made. But there was also laughter, purpose, and a quiet strength built on trust. She had been left behind once, broken and alone. But one person chose to stop, and in that choice, 2 lives were changed forever. The wooden handcart that once carried her pain became nothing more than a memory. What remained was something stronger than fear, proof that kindness, given freely, can carry a person farther than any road ever could.